All right. Hey everybody. Welcome to this year's first psychedelically speaking event. I see some of you here who were attending last year, so thank you for showing up for this first one. And those of you on YouTube, hello. Um, this is a monthly speaker series on the third Tuesday of every month is what we're aiming for. And if you'd like to sign up for the mailing list, I'll throw that in the chat momentarily. Today, we're very grateful to have Graham St. John here to discuss his upcoming book published, or it will be published October 7th, correct?
Yeah.
So coming right up, it's a hefty tome on one of my favorite psychedelic figures, Terence McKenna. I'll also throw a link to the book in the chat in a second. Um, so Graham St. John, PhD, is a cultural anthropologist of transformational events, movements, and figures. His forthcoming Strange Attractor, The Hallucinatory Life of Terence McKenna, published through MIT Press, is the latest among his 10 books, which include Mystery School in Hyperspace, A Cultural History of DMT, Global Tribe, Technology, Spirituality, and Psytrance, Tech Nomad, Global Raving Countercultures, and Free NRG, Notes from the Edge of the Dance Floor. Graham is a senior research fellow in the Department of Media, Humanities, and the Arts at the University of Huddersfield in the UK. So thanks for joining us from across the pond. He is editor of Dance Cult, Journal of Electronic Dance Music Culture, and a curator of the speakers program at Schambach House Ozora Festival, Hungary. And I will put his website in the chat as well. So, without further ado, Graham, I'll give you the floor, and then we'll leave a bit of time for Q&A at the end as well. If anyone in the YouTube channel has questions at that point, feel free to throw them in the chat on there, and we'll relay those questions to Graham. All right.
Well, thank you, Nathan, and everyone at SAPS for inviting me to be the most recent SAP in your history, and so I'm honored and excited to be here. And yes, as Nathan mentioned, we're right on the cusp of my latest book, my biography of Terence McKenna, that is about to be published within the next month. And it's a product of 10 years, and some of that 10 years of research material I'll be drawing on in this presentation about the 20th century's psychedelic Renaissance man, a figure who was basically on a life quest to understand the role of psychedelics in evolution, consciousness, and time. He was and remains an enigmatic figure, a guy who self-identified as anarcho-cryptic, who was mercurial, a fugitive, a freak, an edge runner. He was at once an occult figure in the psychedelic underground and something of a persona non grata in the contemporary world of psychedelic science. So I'm really fascinated with this enigmatic disposition of a figure who is all at once a phenomenon and a kind of heroic figure in the networked underground, but at the same time, something of a sort of untouchable and an outcast in some respects. So that's the enigma that has fascinated me in this project, and my ongoing biographical work on Terence, who, as most people know, died from brain cancer in 2000 at the age of 53, but he continues to haunt the present in various ways. And so what I'm going to focus on is his role as a psychopomp, both during his life and posthumously. His life was a quest for what he called the secret in the form of tryptamine, sources of DMT and psilocybin, which was undertaken in the modern day guise of a mysteries initiate. So during his life, he initiated countless people into the tryptamine mysteries, a practice that he has continued to serve for many in his afterlife as what I call a meta trip sitter. So, as I say, this is content that will be drawn from a biography that chronicles his life work and legacy. And it's really the legacy of one of the most loved yet least understood figures, not only in 20th and 21st century freak lore, but in intellectual history. So this project was 10 years in the making. There's draws on the stories, contacts I've had with uh, 80 people, over 80 people, including friends, family, and colleagues. It's based on extensive research of public and private archives and my interfacing with hundreds of hours of Terence Rapp's kind of spoken word content that hasn't really been given the attention that it deserves in intellectual and academic circles. And so, yeah, so what I was saying to the guys before is that now that I can feel the shape and size and weight of it in my hands, it does appear that this publication is undergoing the formality of actually occurring. And so let's get into it. So what does it mean to say that McKenna has become a virtual psychopomp in anxious times? In Jungian psychology, the psychopomp is a mediator between the unconscious and conscious realms. This realm is often seen to be the shaman, the poet, the great artist. And Terence McKenna was himself a compelling mediator of the unconscious, his own and that of the collective. And I've used an image of of the card that he used probably for a couple of decades. It's the most innocuous looking card, which is a remarkable item in itself. And I have lots of images of people who were given that card that's been stained and dog-eared, and it's this most innocuous looking object is a precious item in the possession of many people. So in the McKenna brothers' first publication, The Invisible Landscape, Terence hinted at his own role as an intermediary when writing in that book that the shaman is able to act as an intermediary between the society and the supernatural, or to put it in Jungian terms, he's an intermediary to the collective unconscious. Terence displayed this ability through his marvelous command of language and his remarkable capacity to retrieve and synthesize information, as well as through the timing of its delivery. And this psychopompic capacity was perhaps best illustrated in what he called the time wave, which was effectively his life's opus and his effort to decode the I Ching as an ancient calendar. So I'm not going to address the time wave in any depth here. I do address it in some depth in the book. There's a whole chapter that is one of the more important chapters in the book. Um, but I'll just say that the time wave can be regarded as a mythopoetic expression of the unconscious, both Terence's and the collective. And you'll see here on the left from his 1971 journal, one of his many representations of the wave of time, which is in mandalic effect. And at that time, he was heavily reading Jung, and very much inspired by Jung's work, and Jung being one of his key mentors. But like I say, I I'm not going to go into depth into the time wave here. There's so many different avenues to Terence. There's so many different layers and ways to work through the material, and so I've decided that um, to look at his role as a mystery initiate, and how that fits into his biography. So, as many know, uh, Terence was raised in Paonia, Colorado, up there in the Rockies, and he was raised in a town with his brother that he at one stage claimed he thought street corners were for churches. In fact, there's a couple of times he mentioned that um, there was that Paonia hosted more churches per capita in the Guinness Book of Records. I'm not sure if that was true or not, but nevertheless, he eventually escaped and ended up in Berkeley in the mid 60s. And before he ended up in Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, he attended high school in California in two different high schools. And is an image from his high school yearbook and some of the self identifications that he made along the way. He met a guy by the name of Rick Watson at a Walt High School, and Rick was his best buddy, his lifelong buddy, and Rick was really quite instrumental to my projects. Unfortunately, he left the building more than a year ago, but Rick was so important to this project, and uh, saw the value in what I was doing, and was of great assistance. And in many respects, the beginning of this project was just as much uh, a biographical work about Rick than it was about Terence. And so Rick had significance with regard to an event that occurred in the Telegraph House, which was the rooming house that Terence leased on 2894 Telegraph Avenue, Berkeley in 1965, just as he was entering UC Berkeley's experimental college. And he would sublet rooms to fellow students over 2 years. So you'll see that well, first of all, that structure at the front was no longer there when by the time he moved in. So this photo was, I believe, taken in the late 40s. And that corner room that faces us was the master bedroom. That was his bedroom. And so that was the site of many events, including the what I've come to call the Alpha event in February 1966. So it was a damp, cold evening on Telegraph Avenue in February 1966, as a strange young man in a little black suit, buttoned up to the throat, mounted the steps and rapped on the door at 2894. A tall, wiry freak bade him entry, held by his host as his great inspiration. The guest is recalled as being always the one to get there first, whatever it was, to do it, to reject it, and to be absolutely contemptuous of it by the time anybody else arrived at the scene of the crime. On this occasion, the guest had arrived with a little glass pipe and stuff that looked like orange mothballs. Something that might interest you, said Rick Watson. What is it? Said Terence. It's called DMT. How long does it last? 10 minutes. To which Terence responded, let the good times roll. Settling in to take hits from a mothball, he was soon transported into another dimension.
And I mean, I sank to the floor. I couldn't move. And this disystolic hallucination of tumbling forward into these fractal geometric spaces made of light. And then I found myself in the sort of auric equivalent of the Pope's private chapel. And there were insect elf machines proffering strange little tablets with strange writing on them. And I was aghast, completely appalled, because the transition had been a matter of seconds. And my entire expectation of the nature of the world was just being shredded in front of me. I've never actually gotten over it. And and it all went on. I mean, they were speaking in some kind of, there were these self-transforming machine creatures were speaking in some kind of colored language, which condensed into these rotating machines that were like Fabergé eggs, but crafted out of luminescent superconducting ceramics and liquid crystal gels, and all this stuff was just so weird and so alien and so un-Englishable. I mean,
From his early Berkeley phase, Terence was driven by an independent course of action and a course of study that preoccupied him for his remaining days. On the subject of his friend's epiphany in February 1966, Watson recalls how Terence announced that he would devote his life to uncovering the origins and meaning of DMT. And from that moment forward, he became an interdimensional explorer committed to purveying the mechanics, aesthetics, and phenomenology of hyperspace. He became a surfer of the surreal and a medium of the impossible. He went on to seek traces of the DMT flash in psychology, esoteric traditions, philosophy, art history, architecture, ethnography. He searched in vain for it in Jung, asserting that the dominant motive is a flood of visual imagery that, try as one might, one cannot recognize as the contents of either the personal or collective unconscious. In states of peak intoxication, he found a world of ideas, visual images, and noetic insight that really could not be co-mapped to any tradition, even the esoteric tradition, he claimed. He pursued it in the art world, likewise without initial success.
To a place that Verrocchio never saw, Michelangelo didn't anticipate it, Yeats didn't know, Blake hadn't a clue, Melville wasn't briefed, and yet there it is,
There was no wrinkle of it, not an atom of the presence of this thing, he said, in the carpets of Central Asia, in the visions of an Arcimboldo or a Fra Angelico or a Bosch. If art, he says, is a probing of the unknown, then why He later inquired, do painters from early Renaissance to abstract expressionists show no hint? We've had Beccafumi, Pollock, Piero della Francesco, but nobody got near this, not even the surrealists. Yet here's this experience that leaves you absolutely quaking. It's like an aesthetic orgasm, he said, a Niagara of beauty, but even alien beauty. At other times, it appeared to possess the qualities of an outrageous joke.
It had the ambiguity of a pun, a kind of zany, impossible, improbable, hysterical revelation of the joke, the self-contradiction, the provisional nature of it all, that it really is a Marx Brothers movie in some sense. It had the...
Now, McKenna had his formative experiences decades before the emergence of visionary art. He may well have seen artists like Alex Gray, Andrew Jones, Luke Brown, Harry Pack getting closer to the action. But back in his day, while finding its traces largely absent in art, clues were uncovered in Finnegan's wake. An effort was mounted to mine that work's seams. In it, James Joyce seems to have come closest among authors to pushing the entire contents of the universe down into about 14 cubic inches, he said. And Russian-American novelist Nabokov was also evocative. Which was apparent in The Gift and Ada, among other works. Nabokov was seen to possess a remarkable capacity to convey unseen realms, otherworldliness. There was also sympathy for Federico Fellini, as McKenna knew his DMT experience in Fellini's films, notably Amarcord, had a common undercurrent in the circus with all of its kinky shadowiness. Scenes in Giletia degli Spiriti are said to have been drenched with the tryptamine kind of consciousness. If traces of the DMT trance were evident in cultural form, they appear to have been located less in high expressions than in lower erotic and grotesque form. By the late 80s, McKenna hits upon the archetype of the circus that he feels rules the DMT experience. By the late 80s, speaking at Esalen, he boiled the DMT carnivalesque circus down to a well-lit central area filled with chaotic activity. This was his domed space. Of notable appearance in this space are clowns, recognizable as what he called the self-transforming machine elves, who competed to gain his attention in DMT space. In the circus, he found a perfect metaphor for DMT, a metaphor fused with childhood memories of Cherry Days Festival, which was celebrated in Paonia on the 4th of July.
And then when you think about the concept of the circus generally, you realize it's a perfect metaphor for DMT, because I grew up in a small town in Colorado where every 1st of July, the carnival would come to town. And we were told we couldn't stay out after 9:30 at night playing when the carnival was in town, because these carny people, they were just a different stripe, you know. Some of them probably drank heavy. They were of racially questionable origins and so forth. And they brought immense excitement to this little town unpacked their wonders, built their Ferris wheels and rides, bilked all the rubes of their cash, and packed it all up and went away. And of course, every kid worth his salt wants to run off with the circus. And then,
And in this, of course, we gain insight on McKenna's desire to run away with the hyperdimensional circus. Over the course of his early questing, Terence's DMT sojourns were like that of a mysteries initiate, interpreted with the aid of scripts from mysteries traditions of the East and West, Vedanta, Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, and alchemy, all mixed in with a Warner Brothers Looney Tunes aesthetic. When he eventually traveled overseas in the late 60s to Jerusalem, Seychelles, India, Indonesia, Japan, he carried the baggage of a Neoplatonist who imagined the DMT experience to be the shortest route to the perennial experience of the One. This framework was eventually modified through his attention to shamanism. By 1969, Terence was living in Bodhanath, Nepal, and thinking that Central Asian Tibetan shamanism had created astronauts of inner space who had good recon in this area. He claimed he was drawn to the area to locate the essence of the DMT vision. He was long fascinated with Tibetan tankas, with their startling epic depictions of the Dharmaphalas. But while traces of the DMT aesthetic were possible in the artistic conceptions of the old pantheon, it was ultimately inaccessible there too. And I'm showing there an image of Bodhanath, and you should be able to see a red circle. And so for those who are familiar with McKenna's memoir, True Hallucinations, you will likely remember the sensational liaison he had on a rooftop in that town. And with the help of his friend Roger Williams, who he met at that time, we've more or less pinpointed the location of roughly the location of his residence in that rooftop in that red circle. Despite the dead-end trails, McKenna clung tenaciously to the idea that DMT was the philosopher's stone associated with alchemy. In fact, back in 1967, he told Dennis, "I know what that philosopher's stone is. It's sitting in that jar right on the bookshelf." Indeed, DMT's metabolism, when taken orally in combination with the Banisteros capi vine, would give this idea credence, with ayahuasca becoming known as the jungle alchemy. And this interest in shamanism and the hunt for an organic source of DMT presages the journey to the Amazon, which was undertaken with Dennis and a small group of friends in 1971. They trekked in search of the bark of Viola theodora, thought to contain DMT, and reported to be used by the Witoto in a paste that had hallucinogenic effects. We can see there the course of their journey down the Putumayo and across on foot to La Chorrera, a small mission in remote Colombia Amazon basin. In their journey to La Chorrera, they instead found the magic in the form of the mushroom, an abundance of Psilocybe cubensis, growing in the dung of cattle grazing in the region's pastures. And we're assisted here with some photographs that were taken by Sarah Hartley, who's known as Vanessa in the biography, and also Dennis's autobiography. And Sarah was So recently retired psychiatrist who has shared gratefully for all of us some of her story that will be related in the book, and she's also shared some photos, some of which are recently uncovered photos. And she went on that expedition partly to record as a documenter and as someone who was quite experienced by that stage in archaeology expeditions as an assistant and as a photographer. And so she took a lot of photographs on that journey and also sound recordings. And unfortunately, all the sound recordings were destroyed by mold, and as were some of the quite a few of her photographs. But some of her photographs do fantastic photos do exist, including this one. Um, so this expedition was known as the experiment, or involved an episode that was referred to as the experiments at La Chorrera, which is the chief subject of Terence's memoir. More recently, I was talking before about the hundreds of hours of Terence spoken word content. Most recently, the oldest known McKenna recording has been released. That was recorded in November 1972, some 18 months after La Chorrera was recorded in a private apartment in San Francisco. And it was recorded by Thomas Starr, who has, with gratitude, uh, happy to see the release of this. It's a 3-hour recording. I'll show you the link to it later. It's recently been it's been released with a video sync done by Peter Bergman, and I'll show you a link to that later. But I just want to play some key moments from the rap. And this is a key moment where, having listened to Dennis's long rants, Terence finally agreed to the proposed experiment.
So anyway, he came and said, I figured this out. This is what you can do. And he was just, and I didn't know anything about it. I mean, my beat was Jungian psychology and, kind of slush-mindedness. I wasn't into superconductivity, simultaneous differential calculus, and that kind of thing. And so he said, we must set up an experiment. We must attempt to do this. We have everything here necessary to do it. We have Yahe, which is our source of harmine. We have Stropharia cubanensis, which is our source of tryptamine. We can metabolize the tryptamine. We have it metabolizing in another form of life, i.e. the mushroom. There's no one around. We can do it. And he just retired into a world of very intense activity. And he wrote it over and over again, the steps, the theory, why it should work. And we moved into the forest. This was the thing. These Indians were living in a house that we were due to take, and they finally got their shit together and moved off. And so we had been told that when they left, we could move to this hut. And Dennis would just spend lots of time alone writing furiously, or he would come back and talk to us. And he was on to something very strange. I mean, his word pictures caused reality to shimmer and crinkle at the edges. I mean, he was really in touch with this bubbling obsidian 4D fluid that we were going to bond into a usable tool and end history and go to the stars and explode the sun and end it all. And so we said, fine, so we'll try it. And the atmosphere was just drenched with tryptamine. I mean, now we had come to the center of the Amazon, and you could feel it in the sky watching you, and you said, oh God, we thought it was nothing, just happy heads trying to explode one last fairy tale so we could be rationalists forever. And now we've come out here, and it's enormous, and it's alive, and it's very old and very strange and just peculiar.
So those familiar with True Hallucinations will be fascinated by this recording, which is called Amazon Psychotropical Quest, which really, it's the oldest known surviving recording, so it's the oldest example of sort of the proto narrative, the protean narrative that he indulged and indulged others with through his oratory through the 70s, and already by this stage, which was mid-November 1972, you could tell that the story was very well rehearsed. And for I guess for train spotters like myself, it's a fascinating document. There's a couple of other um, uh, spots in this recording that interested me. Let's try one.
But from that dawn moment when we piled out of our hammocks to look at the mushroom, something was very, very bizarre about me, that something had happened to me. And it was true. I mean, I was just in a very, very strange place. I was, and am in a very strange place.
And when he was asked later by Thomas Starr what he thinks the flying saucer represents, because he went into a long rap on the flying saucer, the response seemed to encapsulate the preoccupation of his remaining days.
What then do you think that these so-called flying saucers really is? What kind of thing do you think it really represents?
It's the ingression of a higher dimensional epoch, which reverberates through three-dimensional history. It's a shock wave being generated by an eschatological event at the end of time.
So even then, we had the nutshell of his time wave opus, novelty theory, the transcendental object at the end of time, all that stuff. And by the way, and I'll show you a link, another slide later, but I'm publishing an essay that explores this particular rap and kind of attempts to excavate the artifice of McKenna's spoken word art form. So La Chorrera was a catalytical moment in the life quest, a superliminal threshold. A few years later, the brothers discovered a method to successfully cultivate the mushroom spores that were brought back from Colombia. And this is their second book, which was pseudonymous at that time. It's important to note that in the mid-70s, Terence got together with Kathleen Harrison, and they married in 1976. And as my biography details, their romance, relationship, and marriage was thoroughly driven by the mushroom. It's, in fact, started and ended with the mushroom. The couple shared a vision and family, but they also harbored differences of attitude towards native peoples and their relationship with plants. And I begin to explore this, their shared vision and their differences in the biography. Um, but I know that we will learn a lot more from Kat herself, who I understand is writing a memoir, and which I've been, champing the bit to see and encouraging her to, uh, to put out. And so I'm hopeful of that we'll get to read more from her um, about this subject and many other subjects besides um, in the not so distant future. There's an image there from when they were actually both speaking at an event called Psychedelics Conference 2 at UC Santa Barbara, and I believe that was 83. So Terence thereafter became a mediator of what he called the Logos, his mushroom muse, a non-judgmental, informing voice that he called the teacher. And that is, of course, until the end of the 1980s when he stopped taking heroic doses of mushrooms, which is a story that is related in the book and related by way of Kat Harrison, who's told that story, the story of the terror trip in full for the first time, or at least in a fuller way than we've seen previously. And a signature outcome of um, of his mediate of his mediation of the Logos was his opus, Food of the Gods. Um, and this is a book that harbors his stoned ape theory, or at least a version of that. And just as he mediated the Logos in the 25 years since his death, McKenna has performed a kind of Logos-like role for multitudes, as apparent in the frequency of his sampled voice. And I mean, it's my speculation that he is likely the most sampled individual in the history of electronic music. And I've said a lot about that. There's Terence's involvement with the rave and electronic music scene is addressed in the book. So whether mushrooms or DMT, McKenna devoted the remainder of his life to distilling knowledge about tryptamine cultivation, extraction, and techniques of use. With such shamanic tools, he wanted his audience to seize control of the means of perception and become authors of their own experience.
And what makes me wild about this is we're not talking about something that you have to go 500 miles up a jungle river and live with primitive people and study techniques for 30 years and control. We're talking about something which, if I had a pipe loaded with it in my hand, each one of you would be 30 seconds away from what I'm talking about.
If he wasn't already an adept of the tryptamine mysteries, the guy who was once referred to as America's shaman was now a full-blown convert. Returning from the Amazon, he doubled his efforts to distribute the esoteric booty, the botanical boon. He wanted others to access the secret too, at first his friends and then the wider public. And today it is shared with a global audience via YouTube. Today there are hundreds of hours of spoken word material and in a vast archive of unique oratory And I'm just showing the covers of a small portion of that content, that archive. The Esalen Institute, Big Sur, California, was a seminal venue for the rap. His first recorded rap at Esalen was 1982. And so here we return to that protean mid-60s DMT event that provided a storehouse of material for the stand-up philosopher to articulate his psychedelic conversion breakthrough experience.
And you feel like a child, and you are playing with colored balls. You have become the aeon. So this happened to me 20 seconds after I did this drug on this day in 1965. And I was appalled. I mean, I thought that I had my ontological categories intact and I had taken LSD and it was all going forward. And this thing came upon me like a bolt from the blue. And I came down and I said it many times while I was coming down, I cannot believe it. This is impossible. This is completely impossible because it was not, that I was kneeling at the feet of some rishi or roshi or geisha or one of those guys. It was not that there was a declension of gnosis. It was that, friends, right here and now, one quanta away, there is raging a universe of active intelligence that is transhuman, hyperdimensional, and extremely alien.
And so here he is in 1988 at the ethnobotany of shamanism at the California Institute of Integral Studies, serving as a kind of metaphysical sitter for the student novices. As McKenna related to his class, even before hitting his advised 70 milligrams of DMT, which is a very strong dose, vaporized in a glass pipe, the atmosphere is reported to change. And it is as though time speeds up.
Sits down, and then it begins to come on, and it's like it can have many manifestations, but it can be chills, tremoring, knotted stomach, nausea, just restlessness, so forth and so on. This is what I call, taking a page from the engineering book, Q. Q in engineering circles is vibration in a physical system. And you may even, when they launch the space shuttle, if you listen to the radio chit-chat, they will say, approaching max Q, and then they'll say, max Q mark, and then they're through that. What that means is that as the system approaches a transition, it begins to shake. It begins to shake as though it's going to shake to pieces. And the Q forces are building on all the air surfaces, the airframe. Then you break through that, Q falls to zero, and you're in the cool, main engine cutoff. You are now in orbit. All vibration has ceased. Noise has ceased. You are in orbit. You are weightless. You are there. It's different. Now you shut down all these switches related to the launch procedure and begin to set a course through a different kind of medium, a medium characterized by smoothness, stillness, and that sort of thing.
So what fascinates me about this is that this is a good example of how he was able to instantly retrieve information that serves as metaphor, information about space launches that serve metaphorically to convey the idea of the breakthrough experience.
Sit down.
So this preliminal atmosphere sets the stage for the breakthrough experience, which is captured here by Spongle.
So you take, let us assume, a third toe, long and slow. You vaporize and you take it in and in and in, and there is a sound like the crumpling of a plastic bread wrapper or the crackling or the flame, and a tone, a and there is this, and there is there is a cheer. The gnomes have learned a new way to say who.
So it's no real trifle to bring up Spongle, given that Roger Rahm and Simon Posford were on the receiving end of McKenna's stash of DMT, that it effectively inspired their work with the music of Spongle, effectively serving as an elegy for McKenna. Spongle again, here they are again with a hint of Terence's elf spirit familiars. The moment was immortalized.
There is a cheer. The gnomes have learned a new way to say who.
He long marveled over the impossible gifts presented by these singing elf machines, objects regarded as mechanized syntactical Fabergé eggs, their bearers competing for his attention. These ever-shifting synesthetic gifts were true objects of wonder. And this story is again taken up by Spongle.
So like smooth, soft, mid-range basketballs. These things come running forward, and what they are doing with this visible language is they're making it for you.
Through the 80s, a vast library of cultural signifiers were deployed to pass these outrageous entities, their astonishing gifts, and the space they co-inhabit. Plato, Joyce, John Dee, and The Wizard of Oz were among the film and literary sources. The space into which he was propelled was mapped by reference to the merry-go-round, a la Finnegan's Wake. The room is actually going around, and in that space one feels like a child, though one has come out somewhere in eternity, he said. In the same rap, he explained how the entities making themselves known were reminiscent of a scene from The Wizard of Oz where the Munchkins arrive with a death certificate for the Witch of the East.
I always think of the scene in The Wizard of Oz after the house knocks the witch down and she's in Munchkin land, and the head of the Munchkins comes with a scroll, and they all have very squeaky voices, and they sing a little song about "You are absolutely and completely dead," and they're marching around her. So the Munchkins come, these hyperdimensional machine elf entities, and they bathe you in love, which is spelled L-U-V. It's a kind of, well, it's not erotic and it's not heartful, but it sure feels good. And what they are saying is, don't be alarmed, remember, and do what we are doing.
And Terence does just that, faithfully repeating the story of his transdimensional gift bearers, including restating their entreaty to do what we are doing. And for his remaining years, he followed his orders by way of mediumship and emulation. In rap after rap, the recursive story is recapitulated before larger and larger audiences. The story was well rehearsed by the time of Alien Dreamtime, the 1993 performance recorded in San Francisco, and for which Ken Adams was responsible. And this video is going to take us back to 1993.
And what they were doing was they were making objects come into existence by singing them into existence. Objects which looked like Fabergé eggs from Mars, morphing themselves with Mandaean alphabetical structures. They looked like the concrescence of linguistic intentionality put through a kind of hyperdimensional transform into three-dimensional space. And these little machines offered themselves to me. And I realized when I looked at them that if I could bring just one of these little trinkets back, nothing would ever be quite the same again. And I wondered, where am I? And what is going on? And it occurred to me that these must be holographic viral projections from an autonomous continuum that was somehow intersecting my own. And then I thought, a more elegant explanation would be to take it at face value and realize that I had broken into an ecology of souls, and that somehow I was getting a peek over the other side. Somehow I was finding out that thing that you cheerfully assume you can't find out. But it felt like I was finding out. And it felt, and then I can't remember what it felt like, because the little self-transforming types interrupted me and said, don't think about it. Don't think about who we are. Think about doing what we're doing. Do it. Do it now. Do it.
Terence became the emissary for the elves. While he claimed he hadn't found much trace of the DMT space or its occupants in the depth psychology of Jung, the Swiss psychologist nevertheless remained an informing voice throughout his quest-like life. Indeed, Jung's own quest demonstrates curious parallels. As part of the late stages of the alchemical opus, Jung had encountered in Greek mythology the enigmatic Kabiri, chthonic deities associated with Hephaestus, the god of fire, smithing, forges, and volcanoes. In McKenna's views, as stated in Food of the Gods, these alchemical children were similar to the small helping spirits that the shaman calls to his aid. However, while Jung saw the Kabiri as autonomous portions of the psyche that have temporarily escaped from the control of the ego, McKenna found little satisfaction in such explanations Excavating deeper layers in the 70s, he cribbed from Jacques Villay, recognizing his elven aliens as absurd anomalies, pulling the epistemological rug right out from underneath rationality, scientific truths, and official paradigmatic versions of reality, not unlike the meta-logic of sources and other UFOs, as as reported by Vallée in his Invisible College. While couching the machine elves as confounding symbols fomenting up out of the planetary overmind, the appraisal morphed through the 80s. By the decade's end, McKenna's entities bore resemblance to fairies, and notably the Gaelic Sidhe. When writing the introduction to the reprint of Evans Wentz, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, he received the revelation that the fairy faith, as he wrote, is a belief in an invisible co-present dimension in which dwell the transformed souls of the ancient dead, able to interact with humans who wander into the lonely, enchanted landscapes that seem partial doorways between the fairy world and our own. One day spent in the land of Sidhe is sufficient for the great wheel of many centuries to turn in the ordinary world. The understated implication was that the dead were making themselves known to Terence in DMT space, and that their elven form was an expression of his Irish roots. In one of his best summations of elf lore, History Ends in Green, he entertains the possibility that they are spirits of the ancestors. There was a hair-raising quality to contacting these things, he reported. The co-presence of the very familiar with the freakishly bizarre created a distinct form of cognitive dissonance. While we may wonder if he then regarded smoking DMT as a kind of molecular seance, and that the elves were, by implication, his transcended relatives, I've seen no evidence that he associated his entities with specific ancestors of his own. But there was another aspect to the hair-raising nature of this contact experience. In the same rap, it wasn't just any dead soul with which Terence conveyed in hyperspace, but the freakishly familiar entity may have been his own dead self. Dropped in passing, this climactic moment of cognitive dissonance, when you realize that the entity you're dealing with is yourself beyond the grave, said, seems to have amounted to an unwanted peak experience, causing McKenna to flood out in the amazement, wonder, horror, and disbelief department. In the wake of this revelation, we're flooded with questions of our own. Did this impossible moment of truth compel our visitor to become consumed with an inconsolable grief? Was it this moment when the inner curtains may have opened to reveal an interdimensional mirror that gave him pause to back away from the heroic dose? However you carve it, smoking DMT enabled Terence access to the gnosis of elves, that they are underground craftsmen. With this elf fairy-led return to his Irish roots, we approach the Gnostic kernel of McKenna's quest. The true artifice of elves, their secret, is that they fabricate language. This is why in Irish mythology, he said, if you can get elves on your side, you can make great poetry, because they are the keepers of linguistic artifice. And keeping elves on your side makes you into a master poet. His entities were alien, but they weren't the garden variety aliens, or aliens mirroring the so-called extraterrestrial hypothesis. The DMT space was not an austere realm of white lights or alien proctologists making free house calls in the middle of the night.
My aliens seem very alien. And everybody else's aliens seem incredible. They're just like the people next door. You know, they work for the government out at the base and so forth and so on. My aliens are not like that. They are as alien as aliens can be and still show up on your screen as an experience at all. They are not made of matter. They are made, so far as I can tell, in my humble opinion, they are made of grammar. Excuse me? Yes, they're made of grammar. They are made out of language. They are living language.
As the stand-up philosopher, McKenna had a peerless ability to speak the unspeakable, to mediate the immediate, to emit small mouth noises, illuminating time and consciousness, distilled in never repeated bits delivered as gifts to his audience. He was wonderstruck by the synesthetic materiality of language. If the occupants of hyperspace showed him that reality was woven from language, like a hyperspace apprentice, he was driven to make his audience see this revelation. Do what we are doing became do what I am doing. Whomever or whatever the elves were, these spirit familiars were regulars of a mythopoetic cheer squad whose insistent appearances sealed his own stature as a master poet. And over the decades, the Pied Piper passed the pipe around to countless willing recipients. And so he initiated many folks into the tryptamine mysteries, smoking DMT, drinking ayahuasca, mushrooms, and quite a few of those stories are related in my book. There are so many more stories that are out there, and one hopes that my book might encourage, might lubricate the larynx of many folks. There are many stories and legends. For example, Robert Venosa, a visionary artist, he was indebted to Terence for what Venosa called the rebirthing of his superconscious following their first meeting in '93. Both Venosa and his partner Martina Hoffman encountered ayahuasca care of McKenna, an episode that influenced Venosa's ayahuasca dream. But another story that I want to relate to you in some more detail relates to that of experimental filmmaker Ken Adams, who was another grateful recipient. And Adams was the brains behind films like, as we've seen, Alien Dreamtime, but also Imaginatrix and Strange Attractor. And these projects shared Terence's interest in Gnosticism. And Ken was a neighbor to Terence and Kat in the early '90s. And he, at that time, he was working on his film Imaginatrix, a production involving thousands of layered images and motion graphics. But around that time was the time of the divorce, and in the wake of the divorce, Terence asked Ken to help him move his library. Now, this is not a picture of Terence's library, although I imagine had he lived another 25 years, his library may have achieved something like that size. So he asked Ken to help him move the library. And there was one rule. The rule was that he wasn't allowed to open or read any books in the 3 days it took them to move some 3 or 4,000 volumes. And so Ken followed that rule. And on the third day after they'd finished moving the books, Terence decided to light up. And as they were smoking a joint, Ken spies a book that takes his particular interest, which happened to be this book, The Hebrew Goddess by Raphael Patel. And this book took his interest because he was interested in the goddess Inanna, and he found a photograph of the goddess Inanna and held that up to Terence to show him, here, there's a photo of Inanna, and I want to explore her in my new film. And just as he did that, a little cellophane baggie fell out of the book into his other hand. And they're both staring at that, jaws agape, and Terence takes the baggie out of his hand and looks at it, opens it, smells it, tastes it, and says, "Dude, you just found a bag of DMT with your name on it." And Ken had never smoked DMT. This was very significant moments. And but there was a bit of a miscommunication. Terence had apparently said to him, "You should go off and sometime and smoke this all by yourself," which he took to mean that I should go off somewhere and smoke it all at once, all by himself. And as reported to me, that he determined later that there was probably about 8 full doses in the DMT that he smoked all at once by himself. And but he said that that was a profound um, healing event, transition point of his life. It's a remarkable story. I'm sure he will have so much more to say about that um, event. And I have reported that somewhere, that the experience involved a one hell of a meltdown of a machine elf experience. Um, and he claimed it was reminiscent of the way patterns are rendered infinitely in AI neural network models. This is one of many. This story is actually not related in this book. It's one of many examples of the weird tryptomenal initiatory experiences, an accidental initiation, perhaps. So I'm going to draw this to a close soon, but I'll draw your attention to some of the publications that I've been putting out lately, and this is a fun piece that has just been published in Entheogenesis, the EGA journal, #6, and it's called Florentine Prince and Funny Bugger Terence McKenna in Australia. And basically, we get into the back seat of Terence's '97 tour of Australia. Another piece some months ago, Zone Ghosting the Machine, which is published in Institute of Network Culture's journal. And this effectively is looking at Terence as a net era exemplar of a figure who is in a state of permanent departure while always arriving. And it's another fun piece that dives deep into Terence's contemporary, but not just contemporary, his cyberdelic reanimation, which was effectively happening even before he left the building. And most recently, I've published the first part of a serialized blog essay on the rap that I referred to earlier, called Amazon Psychotropical Quest, which was named by Tama Starr and recorded by her in a private apartment in San Francisco, in apartments of Martin Inn. And there's some links there to that essay, the first part of which there's going to be 4 parts to that, which dives deep into the unique nature of Terence's oratory intellect. And many Terence fans are going to enjoy the 3 hours of this recording, which Peter Bergman, We Plants Are Happy Plants, has created a video sync for, and check that out. It's pretty exciting. So just rounding up, during his life and in his afterlife, Terence McKenna became a logos for the global psychedelic underground, as his disembodied voice became spectral over the past 25 years. In strange mercurial fashion, he would play for countless trippers the informing role that tryptamines performed for him. And as such, he remains the freak oracle. And thank you, everybody.